We are at the Norway Chess Classical Tournament today. Alireza Firouzja taking on Shakhriyar Mamedyarov in round 2. And again, this is classical chess, so this is a long game, 90 minutes for each side, plus a 30-second increment. Every time they make a move, 30 seconds is added to their clock. Although, interestingly, this game goes down to just a few seconds for each side. Also, just a warning, this game is unbelievably complicated. It would really take days to analyze this, so I'll probably miss a couple of subtleties here just to let you know, but it's a fun game. Let's go over it. Firouzja white, Mamedyarov black. Firouzja begins with d4, d5, c4, and Mamedyarov plays the Queen's Gambit accepted, taking the pawn. The main move here for white is knight to f3 to help control the e5 square, but Firouzja goes ahead and plays e4, immediately grabbing the full pawn center. But because e5 is not under control, black plays e5 in response. And then knight f3 is played. After d5, black gets good play. Knight f6, c6, and black can attack both the base and the front of the pawn chain. So instead, knight to f3, bishop to b4 check, knight to c3 to block that check, knight f6, attacking e4, but then knight takes e5. Now, black can respond with knight takes e4, but after queen to a4 check, white gets a good position. You have to block that because there's an attack on the king and the bishop. But when you take the knight, bishop takes knight with check as an intermediate move is required. Pawn takes queen to d7, so black doesn't want to allow the queen to take on c6. So bishop takes c4, castles, bishop to a3, and white's a bit better in this position. So instead of knight takes e4, Mamedyarov plays b5. He goes ahead and defends the c4 pawn instead, and Firouzja plays f3, strengthening that e4 square. And you can see that Firouzja has a very nice central formation, but black has got a nice clump of pawns on the queen side to work with. Black castles, a3 hits the bishop, then after bishop to a5, then a4 to attack the pawn chain, hitting b5, and a6, a novelty from Mamedyarov, but a pretty natural move, obviously adding to the protection of the b5 pawn. Bishop to e2, now knight f to d7. He can trade off the knight on e5. It maybe even be used to support a c5 advance later. Bishop to e3 helps control the c5 square. But now c6, again, just creating as strong a pawn structure as possible on the queen side. Firouzja takes on d7, knight d7, castles, and bishop to b7. Now this bishop looks pretty bad behind this c-pawn, but after a move like c5 and f5, it can open up, and as the game progresses, this bishop is very strong on this long light square diagonal. It's interesting to see how that bishop gains so much power from this position. Queen to e1, the queen can shift over to g3 for an attacking formation, and f5. Mamedyarov puts as much pressure on these central light squares as possible. He doesn't like this nice central formation for white. He wants to tear it down. Firouzja goes ahead and takes on f5, rook f5, and there is a potential strong square here on d5. Firouzja plays bishop to d1. The idea is to shift the bishop to c2, and he gets to hit the rook with tempo in the process, so that's a nice little bonus for him. And Mamedyarov just goes ahead and moves the rook before that happens. Queen to g3, moving the queen into attacking position. Black plays knight to f6, and here Firouzja plays bishop to c2, putting some pressure on black's king side, but I have to say it's not overwhelming pressure at all. Black looks like he can still defend on the king side, and he still can work with this nice queenside formation. The knight moves into d5. We talked about that strong square. c5 looks strong here, though, opening up that light squared bishop. If dc5, then b4 hitting the knight, knight e4, b3 hits the bishop, and then taking on e4. And from this position, no matter how white recaptures, black has a decent position. After knight to d5, white could probably take on d5. That might be strong. If black takes with the c-pawn, that permanently blocks that bishop at b7. It can't open up anymore. If he takes with the queen, then a b5 is a problem. Because if black responds with the move he wants to play, which is also a b5, then rook takes a5, rook takes rook, and then queen to b8 check, picking up the second bishop for the rook, and white would just be winning in that position. But Firouzja instead plays bishop to g5. Gains a tempo against the queen. The queen moves to b6, obviously aiming at the king, threatening to take the pawn on d4 with check. Queen to h4 threatens queen takes h7, also defends the d4 pawn laterally. h6 to kick the bishop away. The bishop goes back to d2. And now computers like to move b4, going ahead and advancing that queenside pawn majority. But Mamedyarov plays knight to b4, hitting the bishop at c2. That bishop moves up to g6 to hit the rook, goes to f6, and now bishop back to b1. He wanted this rook on f6. Now a knight to e4 will hit it. It's just a little more vulnerable on f6. So I think Firouzja wanted to draw that rook up one square. Knight jumps into d3, which blocks this bishop, of course. A bishop to e3 to help keep that d4 pawn defended. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes. And now Firouzja does have the two bishops and some strength here, but black, again, that queenside pawn majority could march very quickly. Rook to e8 attacks Firouzja's bishop on e3, which tucks back to f2. Now knight to f4. Now, here black has a very serious threat. If we were to just skip a move and allow black to move, it will be g5, and the game would essentially be over. The queen has nowhere to go. Queen goes to g3, the knight to e2 check would be a fork. And if the queen goes to g4, then bishop to c8 hits it, and that would be it. So he has to do something. And so what Firouzja does is play the king to h1. And that way there's no fork on e2 after g5, although g5 here is a strong move and probably would have been the best move here. But instead, Mamedyarov plays c5, still strong, and opening up this long diagonal. In response, dc5, queen c6, bishop to d4 would give white a decent position. But in the game, ab5 was played instead. Queen to b5 would have been a very strong move. Because the queen has access to this b2 square, the knight, the bishop, the queen are all putting a lot of pressure on g2, and black probably is better in this position. But he goes ahead and takes with the a-pawn instead. Queen goes to g3, and now knight takes g2. He's really loosening up that long light square diagonal, and white really can't take that knight. Takes with the queen, obviously, bishop takes f3. The queen is pinned and lost. If he takes with the king, then rook takes f3, hitting the queen, and also when the rook moves are all kinds of discoveries from the bishop at b7. So he takes on c5 instead, which hits the queen. The queen goes to c6, ignoring the pawn. I mean, the pawn is defended by the bishop at f2, but really piling up on f3 in those light squares. Bishop to d4, and this bishop is well placed. And it attacks the rook on f6. Remember, Firouzja drew that rook to f6 earlier when he played his bishop to g6. So the knight goes to e3. Here, rook takes f2. He could play bishop takes f6. After queen f6, queen to g6. Actually, it hits the rook and really kind of forces the exchange of queens in that case. And he'd be doing okay in that position. But instead, rook to f2 is played. Knight to d1 hits the rook again. Rook to g2. Now, with the threat of mate, obviously, Mamedyarov plays g5 to prevent that. And now bishop to e4. So Firouzja would love to get that black light squared bishop off the board and deal with all those light squared weaknesses. But black can't allow that. So he gives up the exchange. Rook takes bishop. And Firouzja cannot capture it back. So rook to f1 check, bishop g1, knight to f2 check. After rook f2, queen f2, queen to e4 check, and it's going to be mate in a move. So he has to find another way to deal with this sacrifice of the exchange. So he takes the rook at f6 instead. Probably a good decision. The rook goes to e3, continuing to pile onto the f3 pawn. Rook takes d1. Now Alireza is up a whole rook. He got the exchange, and then he's gotten this minor piece, the knight. So if Mamedyarov can't make this pressure against the king count, if he really can't mate Firouzja, then he's going to lose. So he plays rook takes f3, queen to b8 check, king to f7, and they're down to a few seconds here. Both sides have not a lot of time, although Firouzja had a little bit more than Mamedyarov. The bishop retreats to d4. Now rook to f4. He can't, by the way, play rook to f1 check. It looks like he's unveiling this diagonal mate, but after rook f1 is actually check against black. So he wouldn't have time to deliver mate, unfortunately for him. The rook goes to f4. Now mate is threatened. rook d to d2 to defend the rook on g2. Again, if rook to f1 check, bishop to g1, and white's holding it together with the extra rook. So queen f3 instead is played, and the threat here is rook takes bishop. So bishop g1 would no longer be an option, and then queen to f1, and that would be mate. So the threat is rook takes bishop, queen to f1, mate. The absolute best move here is probably just to play bishop to g1 ahead of time, and white is holding it together. But instead he plays h3, and then after queen to h3 check, Firouzja won. Now, at the end, it was a little unclear whether or not Mamedyarov's time ran out or if he resigned, because he had made the last move. But either way, he is losing on the board. My computer gives white +4, so it's definitely a win, and Firouzja would have enough time to defend the position. So Alireza wins this one in the second round of the Norway Classic. Hope you enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.